The eyes of the Senate and all Rome are upon us today. We must make them proud that we are their defenders. More than that, our Roman gods are watching. Make sure they are not ashamed.
The Battle of the Muthul was a significant event that took place in 109 BC, during the Jugurthine War between the Roman Republic and King Jugurtha of Numidia. Prior to this battle, two Roman commanders had failed to achieve anything significant against Jugurtha. However, Aulus, the brother of the second commander, decided to attack Jugurtha's treasury at Muthul. Unfortunately, he was lured into a trap and forced to accept harsh terms to save his army. The treaty that Aulus signed was rejected by the Senate, and this incident marked a turning point in the war. The conflict shifted from being a campaign to punish a misbehaving ally to a full-scale war against a dangerous enemy. The elections for 109 BC were held early in the year, and Quintus Caecilius Metellus, a member of the influential Metellus family with an impressive reputation, was elected to lead the Roman forces in Numidia. Metellus raised a new army in Italy and traveled to Africa to take command of the existing army. However, he had to spend some time restoring order and discipline within the army, which had been left in disarray by the previous commanders. Despite these challenges, Metellus was determined to defeat Jugurtha and end the war. In 108 BCE, Quintus Caecilius Metellus led a Roman army against Jugurtha, the Numidian king, after a series of setbacks and political maneuvering. Jugurtha had retreated ahead of Metellus and set a trap for the Roman army. Metellus' path to the Numidian interior required crossing a mountain range, traversing a wide desert plain, and reaching the river Muthul for much-needed water before moving forward. Jugurtha had stationed a portion of his infantry and all his elephants near the river Muthul to block the Roman army. Meanwhile, he placed his best infantry and all his cavalry behind a low ridge covered in brush near the mountain passes. Metellus spotted the ambush as he descended from the mountain pass but was compelled to refill his army's water reserves. This forced the army to cross the desert without cavalry cover and within view of the enemy. To set up a camp beside the river, Metellus detached a small force led by Publius Rutilius Rufus. The main body of the Roman army moved diagonally towards the Numidian force on the ridge, with the goal of dislodging them. Jugurtha, the Numidian king, placed around 2,000 foot soldiers on the mountain to prevent the Romans from using it as a refuge or protection in case they retreated. When Jugurtha saw that the Roman troops under Metellus had passed the first line of his soldiers, he suddenly gave the signal to launch an attack. Some of the Numidians attacked the Romans from behind, cutting down the last of their troops, while others attacked them from the right and left, pressing them with vigor and energy, causing confusion among their ranks. The irregular manner of fighting used by the Numidians made it difficult for the Romans to respond effectively. They were wounded from a distance and were unable to strike back or engage in hand-to-hand combat. Even those who had withstood the charge with a strong heart were unable to fight effectively against such tactics. The chaos created by the Numidian attack threw the Roman ranks into disarray, making it difficult for them to mount an effective defense. Jugurtha, the Numidian king, had instructed his cavalry to retreat whenever they were attacked by the Roman cavalry. However, their retreat was not in a cohesive manner but instead, they dispersed in different directions. This tactic allowed them to effectively use their superior numbers to attack the Roman cavalry stragglers in the rear or on the flanks, even if they were unable to stop the initial pursuit. Moreover, the Numidian cavalry had a better knowledge of the terrain, and they utilized this advantage to their benefit. If the terrain was hilly, they fled towards the hills where their horses were familiar with the ground and could easily navigate through the thickets, which were obstacles for the Roman cavalry. On the other hand, the unfamiliar and steep terrain was a hindrance to the Roman soldiers, which made it easier for the Numidian cavalry to evade them. In summary, Jugurtha's horsemen used their knowledge of the terrain, their superior numbers, and their tactics of dispersing to outmaneuver and attack the Roman cavalry. The battle between the Romans and the Numidians was a chaotic and terrible affair. The Roman soldiers were separated from their comrades, and could not maintain their ranks or follow their standards. They found themselves defending themselves wherever they were attacked. The battlefield was a confusing mix of arms, weapons, men, and horses. The situation was further complicated by the fact that chance held sway everywhere, and there was no opportunity for advice or command. As the day wore on, the Romans grew weary from their exertions and the heat, but they noticed that the Numidians were also attacking with less vigor. Taking advantage of this, Metellus gradually reorganized his soldiers and reformed their ranks. He urged his men not to weaken or allow a fleeing enemy to win the victory. He reminded them that they had no camp or fortress as a refuge and that they must rely solely on their arms. Meanwhile, Jugurtha was not idle, and he went about encouraging his men and trying to renew the battle. He personally led the flower of his troops in various attacks, charging the enemy where they wavered and holding them at bay with long-range attacks. Both Metellus and Jugurtha were great commanders, but Metellus had the disadvantage of an unfavorable position while Jugurtha had the advantage of better resources. However, Gaius Marius, an officer who had risen from the ranks, reorganized a few detachments and led a column of 2,000 soldiers through the Numidians to free his commander Metellus. Finally, the Romans realized that they had no place of refuge and that the enemy was not giving them any opportunity for fighting. As it was already evening, they charged up the hill as they had been ordered and broke through. Marius then led his men against the rear of the Numidian cavalry, uniting the separated Roman detachments into a single army. The Numidians lost their position and fled. Some were killed, but most were saved by their quickness and the Romans' lack of familiarity with the terrain. In the meantime, Bomilcar, who had been put in command of the elephants and a part of the infantry by Jugurtha, slowly led his forces down into the plain, and while Rufus was hastily making his way to the river, to which he had been sent on, Bomilcar drew up his line quietly, as the circumstances demanded, continuing to keep an eye on the enemy's movements in all parts of the field. When he found that Rufus had encamped and was now easy in mind, while the din from Jugurtha's battle increased, he feared about Rufus, if he knew the critical condition of his countrymen, might go to their aid. Accordingly, wishing to intercept the enemy's march, Bomilcar extended his line, which he had drawn up in close order through distrust of his soldiers' courage, and in that formation approached Rufus's camp. The Romans suddenly noticed a large cloud of dust rising from the ground, obstructed from their view by the surrounding bushes. Initially, they thought it was just the wind blowing up the dry soil. But as the cloud approached and remained unchanged, they realized that it was the enemy advancing towards them. The Romans quickly picked up their weapons and positioned themselves before the camp as ordered. Both sides charged with loud shouts when they were at close quarters. The Numidians stood their ground only as long as they thought the elephants would protect them. But when the elephants became entangled in the branches of the trees and were thus separated and surrounded, the Numidians lost their confidence and started to flee. Most of them escaped unharmed by throwing away their weapons and taking advantage of the hill and the darkness of the night that was setting in. However, the Romans managed to capture 4 elephants and kill the rest of the 40. Despite being exhausted from their march, setting up the camp, and fighting the battle, the Romans remained alert and went to meet Metellus, who arrived later than expected, in order of battle. They were well aware that the Numidians were known for their cunning and that any carelessness could lead to their defeat. As it was already dark, the sound of the approaching armies caused confusion and fear on both sides. However, the situation was quickly resolved when the horsemen sent out by both armies to scout the area discovered the true situation. This discovery led to a sudden joy on both sides, and the mistake was averted. Jugurtha's retreat was well-timed and showed his quick-thinking abilities. As a result, his forces suffered fewer casualties than the Romans, and the battle's outcome was somewhat indecisive. Nevertheless, the Romans survived the battle thanks to the luck of their scouts and the inspirational leadership of Marius, who managed to lead them against the odds. Realizing that he could not win against the well-trained and disciplined Roman army in conventional warfare, Jugurtha disbanded most of his troops and resorted to guerrilla warfare tactics, successfully eluding the Roman army for a while. Metellus was a seasoned general and proved to be an able commander. After the Battle of the Muthul and subsequently maneuvered his army against the Numidian cities, Metellus, winning the applause of the people back home. However, Jugurtha's guerrilla tactics proved effective in slowing down the Roman advance. In a significant setback, Metellus suffered a defeat at Zama, which forced the Romans to withdraw to Carthage. Marius returned to Rome, where he was elected consul with the support of the people and over the objections of the Senate. Since the Senate did not give him an army, he called for volunteers. He allowed citizen classes that were usually not used for military service, the Capitancy, into the army. Marius thus reformed the Roman army, and went on to defeat and capture Jugurtha in 106 BC.